Okay, well, thank you for joining us again. My name's Bill Leggett, and I'm a bookseller at Powell's Books. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. One of the many great events we're looking forward to is Darren Strauss in conversation with Raven Lalani on Thursday, August 27th, and they'll discuss Darren Strauss's new book, The Queen of Tuesday, a Lucille Ball story. Please consider following us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. As well, if you haven't already done so, please sign up for our weekly events email at powells.com. But right now, we're honored to welcome Megan Margulies in conversation with Jacque Nodell about Megan's book, My Captain America, a granddaughter's memoir of a legendary comic book artist. Megan Margulies' essays and reporting have appeared in the Washington Post, New York Magazine, Women's Day, The Atlantic, and Lit Hub, among others. And in today's book, My Captain America, Megan evokes New York City, both in the 1980s and 90s, and during the golden age of comics in the 1930s and 40s, flashing back from her own story to Joe Simons, the legendary artist and comic book trailblazer, and the man she called Daddy Joe. Megan is joined in conversation by Jacque Nodell, author of the book How to Go Steady, curator of the blog Sequential Crush, and granddaughter of Martin Nodell, creator of the original comic book icon, Green Lantern. This event will also include a Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. As well, if someone has typed a question that you'd like to know the answer to as well, please consider upvoting that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. And most importantly, please consider supporting both Megan Margulies and Powell's by purchasing a copy of today's book, My Captain America. A link to buy the book will be shared in the chat this evening. So Megan and Jacque, it's a great, there we go. It's wonderful to have you here today. Thank you and have a wonderful event.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Bill.
My pleasure.
So I just want to say I'm so honored, even if not in person, to be speaking at Powell's. You know, as we were saying, maybe paperback or next book, but I'm just really honored that they're giving me this opportunity. And I am so excited to have Jacque here with me. We've never met in person, but we met through email. I just checked this. It was back in 2014.
Okay.
I emailed you to see if you would let me write an essay for your blog, Sequential Crush.
Okay.
And that, I think that was actually my first piece of writing about my grandfather, like what sort of like got things rolling.
Oh God. Well, I'm honored.
You know, it's all because of you, Jacque. But, you know, it was not only that, but, you know, to actually make a connection with another grandchild of a comic book creator was really special. And it's weird. Like, I feel like we're related, but we're not. Like, we're in this weird, special family together.
It is a very special family. And reading your book, I mean, your story, so similar to mine.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, you grew up in New York City and I grew up in Wisconsin.
So very much the same.
Yes, a little different as far as that. But as far as the grandparents and the going to comic book conventions and just being surrounded by art and pop culture and having that, like you describe in the book, as a coat of arms is
right.
A very, it really, you know, there is that connection there for sure.
Right. And how lucky do you feel to have that character, you know, his artwork, to just whenever you spot it or you see it, like to get that feeling of like.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, I had a doctor's appointment a few weeks ago and there was a car in the parking lot with a Green Lantern sticker.
Ah.
And I was just, you know, it's wherever it's at, you know, you do, like you talked about in your book a lot about whenever you see the symbol, you have this, you know, you're sort of caught, you know, a little breathless.
Yeah.
And you think of your grandfather.
It's a little calming too. Like you're like, okay, everything's sort of like I'm being watched over, if you believe in that stuff. But
It is, for
yeah.
sure, for sure.
So I was actually going to start with reading a bit, and this is a scene. I'm in his apartment, as I usually was, but I had just started dating somebody for the first time, and this sort of segues to the romance comics and that creation. And I am excited to talk more about that with you, and because there's a lot of focus on Captain America, which rightly so, but romance comics were wildly successful as well. And so I'm excited to put a bit more focus on that.
All right.
So Daddy Joe was finishing the lettering of an intimate confessions cover the day of my visit. "You conceited oaf," a woman cried as she slapped a man across the face, his back to the reader and a startled red "ow" above his head. "Women are crazy," Daddy Joe explained as he darkened the F in oaf. I rolled my eyes and picked up a stacked pile of empty yogurt cups. He stopped and looked at my hands. "That's not trash, you know. Don't let your mom get a hold of those. I use those to mix colors. So smart, right?" He went back to drawing the marital spat. "And this?" He pointed to the tabouret and a spinning yellow contraption on top like a three-tiered wedding cake holding his brushes and X-Acto knives. This was being sold for kitchen appliances. My brain works in mysterious ways, doesn't it? It was his mysterious brain, its constant tendency toward wonderment, that helped him come up with the winning comic book ideas. In the late 1940s, Daddy Joe and Jack were looking for the next big thing. Daddy Joe remembered his parents reading true love stories back when he was a child, and he had long wondered why adults were reading comic books meant for children. It was time they created something for older girls, he thought, young women who were also in need of an escape from reality. The only comic books marketed for girls were Archie and Punch and Judy, and they didn't feel sufficient. Daddy Joe did a quick mock-up of the first cover of Young Romance with the blurb, "Designed for the more adult readers of comics." As Daddy Joe told it, after he finished the cover, he tucked it under his arm and crossed the street to Jack's house. Roz, Jack's wife, was in the kitchen and nodded upstairs. "He's in the bathroom. He's been in there for days." Daddy Joe said he would wait, but Roz assured him it wasn't digestive issues. Jack was busy painting the walls of the bathroom, a large mural of blue waters and tropical fish. After climbing the pull-down ladder to the attic, Jack and Daddy Joe settled into the studio, and Daddy Joe fell back on the couch. He showed him the cover. Jack loved it. "It's time we go into business for ourselves," Daddy Joe declared. But Jack reined him in, reminding him of the volatile nature of the comic book business. They decided to draw up an entire issue before showing it to a publisher. That way, they would have a head start if anyone tried to steal their idea. They eventually made the sale to Crestwood Publications. Months later, on his way to the hospital where Harriet had just given birth to their first child, Daddy Joe saw a gaggle of girls around a newsstand. Peering over their shoulders, Daddy Joe saw, to his delight, that they were reading the first issue of Young Romance. "Kirby and I knew it was a hit then," Daddy Joe recalled. Young Love was released soon after and sold almost as well as Young Romance. Between the two titles, they sold almost 2 million copies per issue. Daddy Joe wrote much of the love advice under the guise of Nancy Hale, and according to his eldest daughter, Missy, it taught her to be a good girl as she grew up. The twins, my mom and Aunt Gail, on the other hand, had to be watched. Every time one of them got dropped off by a boyfriend, Daddy Joe flipped on the floodlights in the driveway, released the Great Danes, and headed outside with a flashlight. "Father," a twin would yell, one foot still in the car, their curls glowing between the door and roof from floodlights. "Get the dogs out of here." The Great Danes danced frantically around the car, fighting the air with each threatening bark. "Hi, how's it going?" Daddy Joe asked, shining his flashlight in the wide eyes of the latest boyfriend, who usually sat frozen, clutching the steering wheel. With a slam of the passenger side door and a wave, the poor guy was released and permitted to drive away to safety. So what I wanted to know from you is, why are you such a better granddaughter than I am? I just think it's so amazing. I'm often embarrassed how I don't know that much about the comic book industry. A lot of what I have in the book is what I learned from him and from my grandfather's book. But I think it's amazing that you have dedicated yourself to studying the romance comics and have put so much work into that. So I'd love to hear why you decided to do that, what inspired you, and why you think they're so important.
Sure. Well, I think when I was going to comic book conventions with my grandparents, I was always searching for that. I really wanted to be into comic books because I felt like, partially duty, and then
right,
like partially that, okay, these are fun and I love, pop culture. And so once I turned like 12 and 13 and like going to comic book conventions were more, started to be a little bit more about comics and not just seeing family.
mm-hmm.
I really was seeking out that genre, and I started reading like I liked Archie and Millie the Model.
Darcy. Yep.
And I think I'd be hard pressed to find women our age that didn't read Archie
right.
at all. And I also, funny enough, was really into the Monkees, which I still am today. And I started going around to conventions to collect Monkees memorabilia. And I did find romance comics during that. But it wasn't until later on, I think I was in graduate school, and I really started getting into comic books, and I wrote my master's thesis on comic books, and not the romance ones, but on the monster comic books, like the Kirby monsters. And I see we have someone that said they love the Monkees too. And I started to collect the romance comics, and I really saw, I was interested in them, and just searching the internet, this was about 2007, 2008, I was like, there's nothing on the internet about them. And kind of on a whim, actually someone, I was like at a coffee shop one day, and I wear glasses, right? Because I'm blind. And some guy was like, are you a blogger? I'm like, no. And he's like, well, you look like a blogger. And that actually kind of got me thinking, well, maybe I should blog.
Maybe I should be a blogger.
Maybe I should be a blogger. So I did. I started to blog, and I was like, I'm going to blog about romance comic books because there's just nothing out there. So I just started on a whim, and once I started, I couldn't stop. So, and it's funny because I am in love with this genre that your grandfather created, and so I have so much to thank your grandfather for what he created. So and not a lot of people know what romance comic books are now, but like you said in the book, each of those issues was selling 2 million copies. I mean, that's a lot of comic books. And it's funny, people don't know about comic books, but when I tell them, okay, here's what I study, I'm like, do you know Roy Lichtenstein? Have you ever seen a Lichtenstein painting? Like, those are direct swipes, or whatever you want to call it. Some people are Lichtenstein fans, others are not. But you know, those are swipes from the romance comics. And so for you, like, I can't even imagine seeing, you know, those paintings in a museum and then thinking that's what, you know, your grandfather created. And obviously, you know, comic books have had more of a lowbrow, you know, standing than pop art. But, you know, I just thought that was really cool reading the book and reading that chapter. I pretty much, in my copy, I just highlighted like that whole chapter. I was like, yes, I just, you know, I love hearing about Captain America, but I was also like,
right, there's so much more, right?
yes, there is so much more. And, you know, actually before he, him and Jack created romance comics, some people cite this other book called My Date, which was published by Hillman as the first romance comic, but most people go with young romance because the My Date was more of a teen humor book, like Archie, that sort of thing. So I count young romance as the first romance comic.
Was your grandfather alive when you started getting into the romance comic stuff?
You know, he had just passed away, I think. So, which is too bad because I wish I had a chance to ask him about it, because he did work on some when he was at what we now call Marvel. He was in the bullpen, and he was an an editor on some of the romance comics, the Miss America title. Yeah, so he actually worked on some romance comics, and I do wish that I had, you know, gotten to talk to him more about that.
I sort of had a similar experience with, I think about the time that I had reached out to you, I was making these t-shirts with some of the romance comic images on them. And I had, I think I had like a photo shoot of wearing them, and I had just gotten the pictures back, or I had just set up my Etsy page with them, and I was so excited to show him. And he died. It was literally the next day after I got everything. And yeah, it's, you know, you always think of those, if he could have, you know, I mean, he was 98, so I'm grateful for all those years, but
yeah,
you know, obviously if he could read this book, that would be amazing too. But I don't know. I don't think I would have been able to write the book anyway with him alive, and, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think that too, like me studying romance comics, you know, maybe because he was no longer around, it felt, you know, nostalgic, or, you know, something.
A connection.
Like, a connection for sure.
Right.
You had actually talked about earlier in the book, before that section, about how Daddy Joe, because you call him Daddy Joe, how his parents were reading, they were basically romance pulps, which would have been the predecessor to romance comics. I just thought that was so cool to hear that that's sort of where he was inspired.
Right. And, you know, I think they entered a writing contest, and he saw them. It was like, where did you first fall in, how did you, or where did you first fall in love? You know, tell us your story. And he remembered seeing them hunched over the table, like really working hard on the story. And he said that inspired him, which is funny because seeing him, you know, dedicate his life to art was inspiring for me. And I think that's so important for creative people who think, I want to dedicate my life to art in some way, to have a family member who shows you that it's possible, and that it's okay, and it's not strange, and it's not the worst thing in the world.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, who knows if I or you would have been creative without our grandparent, you know, our grandfathers,
Yeah.
but it certainly was influential. And kind of leading into that, how he saw them and it inspired him. I loved how you told us in the book how he was the person behind the advice columns, the early ones, and he was writing as an advice columnist. Nancy Hale, it was his pen name, and those were, the advice columns were such a big part of the romance comics and what made them you know, so relatable, because people would write into them and, you know, ask for love advice. And so I don't know, did he ever talk any more about that, or?
No, but my question, I always think, you know, if that was happening now, if people found out that a man was answering these questions as, you know, as Nancy Hale, like, I don't think that would fly today at all. Like,
yeah, probably not.
Like, it's pretty messed up, actually, if you think about it.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, that's a funny. It's a funny thought, thinking him as Nancy Hale.
Yeah. Let's see. I just love hearing how he came up with them, you know, like we just said, the pulps and his parents. But I also think it's so cool how he presented it to Jack, and the story of, you know, him being in the bathroom. That's crazy. So and I have to ask, did you ever have a chance to meet Jack Kirby?
No. I think Jack died in the early 90s.
94, I believe.
No, they didn't have much of a relationship by that time.
Okay.
So no, I've connected on like Twitter or whatever, Jack's grandson, and we've messaged a few times. And, you know, as I've said before, it's just always fun to connect in some way with it, especially Jack's family, because I feel like they were very close at one point, and I feel like it would be like meeting long lost siblings almost.
Oh, absolutely.
They spent so much time together. I mean, they lived in houses across the street from each other.
I was blown away. I didn't realize that they lived across the street from each other. That is just, you know, I can't imagine today, like, having a coworker that, you know.
You want to kill them, maybe?
That's so funny. But also, I think it's hard for us today to think about how popular the romance comics were then. They were just, you know, they were selling, you know, like hotcakes. And I think that, you know, I was kind of thinking, you know, why were they selling so well? And, you know, it's, you know, the superheroes like Captain America, you know, they waned after World War II. Obviously that imagery wasn't as important for people. But I also started thinking that, you know, the baby boom was happening, and like people were, you know, ready for love and romance and, you know, talking about dating and marriage and all the things that are talked about in romance comics. So I think that time after World War II, you know, people were really ready for that more domestic, you know, so I think he struck sort of when the iron was hot, for sure.
You know, and a lot of people refer to him as a businessman. And it actually upsets me when they, you know, even in articles, or they say Joe Simon, you know, he was more on the business side of things. He wasn't so much an artist. The truth is that he was so good with that business part of it, which I think was very, very helpful. But I read these things and I'm like, he was an artist. He was an artist. And I know that was so important for him to be recognized as that. because he did do a lot of the artistic side of it, and
Oh, absolutely. I was looking at some of his covers earlier. I love, one of my favorite, when I think of Joe Simon and romance comics, one of my favorite titles is called Going Steady. And I kind of actually played on that with the title of my book, called
Show it
How to
Jack.
Go Steady. Yes. I self-published this, so I don't think it's available at Powell's, but if you check out my website, it is on there. Yeah, I was thinking, gosh, oh, I just lost my train of thought. I looked at my...
Do you have a baby? Is that why?
Yes.
Do you have mommy brain? Right.
I do. Yes, I will attribute it to mommy brain. I have an 8-month-old, so.
Then I understand.
Yeah. But yeah, the romance comic. Oh, I was looking. Okay, here's what I was saying. I was looking at different covers, and I really love Going Steady, the title he did in the early 60s. There are these beautiful painted covers, and it's like, you really think of, comic book artists as drawn and line work, but then he had these beautiful paintings. So I don't know, do you have a preferred style of his as far as the art goes?
He had, and it's funny you mentioned that, because when I would see his he had some paintings up at home. He had a clock in his apartment that he painted, and it was they loved Great Danes, as you heard in that chapter. They had many Great Danes, but he has a clock that is just like a round painting of a family of Great Danes. And it's just, I just remember even as a child just seeing that and be like, wait a minute, is that the same? Like, this is so different. And I was just really impressed that he could have both sides of that artistic talent. Like, just these, like, it was just so good. Like, it wasn't just these lines and bright colors. It was like how he blended the paint, and it just looked so realistic. I don't know if I have a preferred. I talk about this in the book, but he sort of took a break for about a year from drawing comics after my grandmother died. And that's when he really focused a lot more on that style of painting. And one of them is up in his apartment, and it's just very like somber, dark painting of an old woman walking down a hallway, and I think it's an apartment building. And it's just so, not just because of the painting style, but the colors, and it's so dark, and it was just so different. And you could really feel his heartbreak in a way, and the sorrow behind that painting. So I do see the comic book work as more uplifting. It's just when he was really like sparked and creative and popping with ideas. So yeah, they're different.
Yeah, and you also mentioned really briefly in the book that he worked in the advertising industry, which a lot of comic book artists did. So many of them did, my own grandfather included. And so do you know much about his time working in the advertising industry?
I know it was done to provide a steady income for the family, because the comic book industry was so volatile, and you would have these really hot moments and then it would be quiet for a while. I remember as a child, he would incorporate us into some of these illustrations, and he had a lot of fun with, changing my mom's nose, or like giving himself hair, or he like really enjoyed doing that.
Oh, that's amazing. Let me see. I really, the book was just so good. I wrote on my social media, I think I posted this last night. I sobbed. Like, I totally sobbed because,
Good. No, I'm kidding.
yeah,
No, but that means a lot. Thank you.
like, just ugly crying. And, it was partially because, obviously I do have the family connection, and it reminded me of my own
Right.
grandfather, who also passed away in his 90s. And losing that, as you described in the book, that anchor, your family, it's like everything, once they passed away, everything was going to change.
Yeah.
But, I absolutely loved it. And I could definitely hear, I had to go back on YouTube and watch some videos of him, because you had mentioned his voice, his current voice. And I don't think I ever met your grandfather. It's possible I did as a child at a convention, and I don't remember it, but I probably didn't. But so I listened to his voice, and there are so many things I could hear, like the part you just read, about the yogurt cups, so smart, so clever, that sort of thing. And also, a huge thread of the book is your experience as an adolescent. And another reason I really love the book, not just because I saw myself and my grandfather in it, but because I also saw myself as just like a frustrated teen. We didn't grow up in a small space, like you talk about, 550 square feet, we lived in a house, but I come from a family with I'm one of 7 kids. Yikes. And 2 of my siblings were born when I was when I was in high school. I was a teenager, so so I understood that, like, having younger siblings, but I think anyone who reads this will really be moved by those universal themes.
I mean, that was my biggest hope in all of it, was to not only present this book as a tribute to our relationship, but to also allow people who might not necessarily be comic book fans to find something to relate to. I mean, we've all loved someone and then had to deal with their loss. And, while I have the benefit of seeing Captain America everywhere, and that offers me a sense of peace, I think we all, on some level, are looking for loved ones and that we have lost in the world. And I've mentioned this before, when I talked about the book, while writing it and even after publishing it, I've had plenty of people say, I was very close with my grandmother or my grandfather, and I totally can relate to this. And it's funny because I haven't read many books about that relationship. It was really nice to just know that other people had that special relationship with their grandparents, because grandparents are present in their grandchildren's lives, and but not always are they such a large presence, where, to the point where it just wrecked me when he died. And I always felt a little funny about that, like this is weird that I'm this sad about it and this emotional.
Well, I mean, not that, the rest of us don't have close relationships with grandparents, but it almost seemed like you and Daddy Joe were like kind of like soulmates, best friends. Like,
well, my mom used to call us an old married couple.
I could totally see that. Like that, the picture that was taken by the photographer of you over his shoulder, I think that picture just speaks volumes of your relationship, and sort of, you could see the humor in it, yet like the seriousness and that sort of thing. But Yeah, overall, I mean, I love the book and how it was such a mixture of your memories and your experience growing up in New York City, and also that mix of comic book history.
Mhm.
And, as much as I love comic books, it wasn't overpowering,
Right.
which I appreciated. Like, because sometimes I don't want to read entirely about comic books. I want to read about other things. So it was such a beautiful blend
You have to
of,
find like the right balance when you're putting historical stuff, or I don't know. I felt like the emotional side of it had to be strong enough to keep the reader reading and turning the
oh yeah,
pages, because while the comic book and his career, that's the history of all that is so important. um you need a little bit of heart in there, I think, to keep it moving.
absolutely. So I see we're starting to get some questions, and I do have I have two questions for you real quick, and then we'll get to the audience questions. But so did you ever get into the romance comics? Do you ever read romance comics?
I read them a little bit, but honestly, it was the Archie comics, and I always feel really bad saying this.
Yeah.
It's like nothing he did. It was really the Archie comics. He would get
Yeah.
those big boxes from the publishers, and those were the ones I was pulling out. And Casper, Richie Rich, I like. Yeah, and he actually, when he came for Grandparents' Day at school, he would always draw Casper. And he liked to show everybody how Richie Rich was Casper with, hair or whatever. Like it's the same drawing. He was very proud of. He knew that trick.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. And also, I'm just kind of curious about the fate of that drawing of the first drawing that they presented with the notes that was hanging in his house. Do you have that, or where? No, as a grandchild myself, yeah. I'm guessing you don't have it, because
yeah. One day. No, definitely one of the kids has it for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Or no, actually it might be in a museum somewhere. I don't know. I do not have it though. I have a great painting that my husband actually bought from an auction house, which is just so strange. One of his.
I just got there's a message here that it's in the Library.
Oh, the Library of Congress. Yes. Yes.
Well, I think that's a wonderful home for it.
Yeah.
And everyone can appreciate it there. So that's amazing. But it's great that you have, it was behind you in that photo, correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was.
Yeah, that was on his wall for a while.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Well, are you ready for some questions?
Bring it.
All right. Let's look at the questions. Okay. Let's see. With manga, this is from Lawrence Brenner. With manga having a lot of romance and a slice of life, do you think there can be a big return for American romance comics? A return for romance comics. Yeah, I mean, I think that's going on. I think there's tons of comics with romance and graphic novels, and like you said, manga. I don't think it'll ever return, quite like it had, just because comics aren't as mainstream as they once were. But as far as in the comic book, world, I think there's a ton of great, new comics with it. And I'm the worst person to ask, because I'm always like, I don't read anything after like 1980. So, but there are some good, and I actually, now that I'm saying this publicly, and I've said it other places that I really, have to get on it, but just having had a baby makes it a little tough. But I'm going to be starting a podcast about romance comics, and hopefully by the end of the year. As we've all felt, 2020 hasn't exactly been like a great year.
Who knows? Yeah.
For productivity. But I will be talking more about modern romance comics there.
Cool.
Okay, so this is a question for you. Question to Miss Margulies. During your research, did you find any interesting or amazing factoids that could not be included in the book that you can share?
Well, that I can share. No, not that I'm trying to think. I thought of one juicy one, but I'm not allowed to share it.
Okay, ones that you can share.
Yeah, let's think. Let me think on that.
Okay.
I'll let it marinate.
Okay. Let's see. And this is from our mutual friend, Charles Moss, who actually lives in my town. But Megan, how difficult was it for you to write this book from an emotional standpoint? What was the process like? Was it hard to revisit those memories and write about them?
There was a lot of crying. I mean, obviously there's certain parts of the book that were harder for me to write. And, even now, I mean, I won't read those sections for readings because every time I read it, it just brings me back to some of the hardest moments of my life that I know that I wouldn't be able to read it properly. Nobody would be able to understand me. But I think after having finished the book and looking back at the process of it, it was very cathartic because I think I was bottling up a lot of those emotions and the sadness, and I kind of stored it away, and getting it onto the page and out there, I was able to really even learn new things about what I was feeling and why, and it forced me to face it. I had avoided, I was uncomfortable going to New York in general after he died, but especially his neighborhood, I avoided it at all costs. Like I could not even walk down a block, 2 blocks from his apartment. But towards the end of writing the book, I was in New York and I made myself go to his building. I asked the doorman to let me up and go to his floor. I stood in front of his apartment door, and it was brutal, but it also, after I left, it just felt so good to just, make myself go there and realize I'm okay. Like I'm going to be fine. And that was okay. So that I'm glad I pushed myself to do that. Yeah.
Well, we're glad too, because then we got to read about it.
And I get to make you cry.
Yes. You make me cry, and my baby was sitting in her playpen like, what's happening? Why is mommy crying? Yeah. And there's another question. It's kind of a similar question. Was there a certain part of the book that moved you most emotionally? Or I don't know if this question is maybe directed to me, but writing the book, was there a part that moved you the most?
It was definitely the chapter about cleaning out his apartment. The whole family gathered together, and I think the grandchildren were allowed to take 2 things, and we had to ask one of the parents. And I knew that was, I mean, even just walking into his apartment and knowing he wasn't in there was brutal, but walking out and knowing that would be the last time that I would be in his apartment was so hard. And I knew, he had lived there for so long. We knew that they were going to totally gut it and renovate the apartment, and that it just was never going to be the same, which is actually, I'm kind of glad they did that, because that was his apartment. And I'm glad that whoever's living there now, it looks different, and just how it was is just for him. And
Oh yeah. Okay, let's see.
I'm still trying to think of the factoids. You know, I think the things that I discovered, but they're not career related, but I got to talk more with my mom about him, and I'd ask more questions, and I learned just some things about her childhood and, you know, small things like how she felt when he started dating again after my grandmother died. And I hadn't really spoken to her a lot about that before. So that was, but I'm trying to think of career stuff.
Yeah, we had another question. Did you find material that wasn't in his autobiography, or that he alluded to at the time that you added to your book? But that's kind of a similar question, but
yeah, I mean, there was always these stories that I heard him talking about, but I think it was important for me to make sure that I was getting things right. Like, I really didn't want to like get any information wrong. So I felt more comfortable taking it from his words in his book. I did a lot of searching on YouTube, and there are all these old interviews with him and footage from comic conventions when he was panelist. You know, that was a big fear for me, was to get something wrong about his career or about his experience. So it was important to sort of have that backup. Yeah.
Let's see, another question here. Did either of you work with Michelle Nolan on your projects? She's the only person I know of who did long-term research on romance comics. I know Michelle Nolan. We have been on panels together, and we email, and last time I was at San Diego, we had breakfast. So I definitely work with Michelle and talk frequently with her, mostly by email. Have you met Michelle?
I haven't, no.
Okay, well, I'll have to introduce you.
Yeah. So, you know, the book has a lot of research components to it, but it wasn't so much as that wasn't the point of the book. And so it wasn't like I was interviewing people about the comic book industry and the history of it. It was more important for me to bring him to life in his past and his experience through his words, and, you know, through the memories that he had that he shared with me. So, yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons I really loved it personally, was that, like I said, it was just that balance was so good. And that's what made it so readable and emotionally moving. Let's see, we have another question. The character of Captain America went through lots of changes in the decades, many of them quite political. Did your grandfather ever comment on any of that?
I mean, he loved when Captain America would sort of be the face of, after 9/11, he made sure to recreate the first cover of Captain America, and instead of Hitler, he put Osama bin Laden getting punched in the face. So he loved to bring the character back as sort of an FU to whatever horror was happening. I mean, because that's why he was originally created, right? You know, he was giving power, he was giving voice to these people during difficult times, and he definitely made sure to keep doing that.
Awesome. Do you have any favorite celebrations of your grandfather's works, or any favorite homages, or anything that, you know, besides like the movie?
This is so weird. I love the memes that come up every 4th of July, where it's just like, happy 4th of July. Here's Captain America punching Hitler in the face. Like, I just love those because they're so popular, and even if people aren't comic book fans, like they're sharing it. And I think that just started a few years ago too, but now you can, every 4th of July, I'm like, yes, he's coming back.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think so many people know, that cover of him.
Yeah.
Even with like the, Charlottesville thing, like, the imagery of punching Nazis,
Yeah.
I think that came up, and so yeah, that would be very cool to see. What did you think of the movies?
I mean, he got to see the first one, which
That's right.
I'm
Yeah.
so happy about. I mean, he was blown away. I can't even imagine creating something and then like 70 years later, it's this huge production. And I mean, they're amazing. And I think they're consistently good, which is hard to come by with these movies, but they really are. And I think he would just be so proud of how they've handled the character. And
Yes.
maybe one day I can thank Chris Evans in person.
I was gonna ask if you've met him, but
You know what, we did. I think that we were at the premiere for the first movie. Yeah, we met a few of but we were walking around there like, who our grandfather is? Like, yeah, whatever, you're a star, but do you know who our grandfather is?
oh yeah. Well, I'm sure. I mean, I don't want to speak for the cast of the Marvel movies, but
I
really,
I think I know what you're going to say, but I really hope they know who Joe Simon. I mean, I think a lot of people know who Jack Kirby is.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Kirby, Stanley, those are well-known names. Joe Simon, not so much. And I mean, I think if you are deeply invested in the comic book world and comics, that you know who Joe Simon is. But that was a big thing for me, was I wanted people to know who he was, because he often gets lost in the background.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I hope the cast, they all knew who created Captain America.
Yes. We have another question. How did it change you going from being an only child to a child with siblings?
Well, I was, I think, 11 when my brother was born. So I had already had the only child time. I had almost a decade. I was excited to have a sibling. I wasn't as excited to get another one when I was 17.
I know.
We know how 17-year-olds are.
Yeah.
And that, we were in such a small apartment, and I didn't really have an escape except for Daddy Joe's and going out with friends. But I mean, I'm obviously grateful for my siblings, because now that we're older, it was a little hard in the beginning because they're so much younger, but we've reached that point where we're like totally on the same level, and it's like having two best friends. So all the struggle and pain, it was worth it.
Good. Was it, I guess in relation to Daddy Joe, was it hard to share him, with these new siblings?
No, it was I never had trouble sharing him with siblings or cousins or I mean, I feel like what we had was just very different, just because I had been the only child for so long. I was the first grandchild. And we just had so much more time together, that I knew it was just different, and that was fine. I was never mad about it.
Good. Let's see if we, someone commented, those of us who know who Joe Simon was and what he contributed feel that we owe him quite a debt. Lots of brilliance there and lots of enjoyment we got from him. You must be so proud.
I'm so proud, and I'm also just like, I get so emotional thinking about the people who do know about him and celebrate his work and spread the word about him. It just, it's like an extended family of some sort. And it's very, very heartwarming to know that people appreciate his work. And, for the people who met him, just how funny and nuts he was,
I know, I'm so sad I didn't get to meet him, because he sounds like he was a riot, like, which so many of those
I feel like they all were, right? Yeah, there had to be a lot of personality, I think, to be in that business.
There was, I think, partially that business, the time, having been raised, in the Depression and during, tough times, and also, another, this might be a question from me, is, do you think being Jewish had anything to do with, that humor? I mean,
the humor, the disgusting cooking, it was,
you don't like gefilte fish?
I do not like gefilte fish, but I love herring. No, he had this pressure cooker that he used all the time, and he would just put the strangest parts of animals in there. And like, honestly, if I smell like stew and cigar smoke together, or coffee, like, which sounds so nauseating, but like, that brings me back to his apartment so much. But, yeah.
I loved the part where I think your mom said, you could put the brisket in the freezer, like.
It was very important to him.
Yeah. Oh, that was really funny, and reminded me of my family as well. Let's see if I missed any questions. Someone said they were referring to the battle over the rights to the heroes. Did he have anything to say about sort of the legal aspects of, since he was a businessman, and about that you can talk about?
I mean, he tried his hardest, and yeah, I mean, that was the business side of him, where he saw the opportunity. They had changed the law on when you could try and reclaim the rights, and he pounced. He was like, all right, we're going to try it. He tried hard. He didn't obviously get the rights, but we're happy at least that on the movies or wherever Captain America is mentioned, it has to say co-created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. So and seeing that, when I watch the movies and I see that in the credits, like, that always sets me off.
Oh my gosh.
I'm like, yeah, that's him.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Well, it looks like we're out of time. Yeah. An hour just flew by. I could talk to you for like 7 more hours, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie,
for having me. And check out, be sure to buy the book on Powell's website, and check out my website.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And thank you everyone for joining us at Powell's for this event. It was a pleasure to host Megan Margulies and Jacque Nodell. Please consider purchasing a copy of Megan's book, My Captain America, by visiting powells.com. And while you're there, please be sure to check out our lineup of other upcoming virtual events. And we look forward to seeing you at one soon. So Megan and Jacque, thank you once again. We're honored to have you, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.